Here we are again. It's time for fall and what everyone seems to consider as a flu season. Throughout history, for thousands of years, this is the time of year when people have sore throats and movement of that energy into the lungs, respiratory infections, which most of us are considering a virus at this point, flu. Many will disagree and say they're actually respiratory infections, but we can look at it as a flu if you like as well. And people overall find that they're challenged in the lung area and their digestive system, if those happen to be weaknesses for them. In Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine, it's recognized that both the lung and the large intestine are most easily affected, either for the positive or the negative at this time of year. Now, the majority of us have been trained to look at these kinds of situations as a time for an adversarial relationship with the flu. We're going to go to war with it. We're going to go to war with bronchitis, if you're one of those people who gets a yearly bronchitis. We're going to go to war with pneumonia. Instead of realizing that if these things happen to us, there are two things. They're a communication that something is out of whack that needs to be really looked at. That could be far more serious than a flu. And that our body is trying to heal something. The way that our body heals itself is by producing a lot of heat, which is a fever, and then a lot of fluid, like mucus or pus or whatever, and inflammation. That's one of the ways that our body gets rid of toxins and poisons. And we have numerous types of toxins and poisons. The physical toxins and poisons, I think we're very well aware of, having to do with what's in the air and also all the issues that are in front of us with foods that are what I call frankenfoods. They're not the real thing because of our need to eat quickly or just out of ignorance of the importance of eating real food. And then we also have the poisons and toxins of emotions that we are oftentimes unaware of. So when we're looking at the realm of the emotions that are involved with the lung, we find, and the throat for speaking, and typically this all starts with a sore throat, we find that here we are entering into the time of year where first of all there's Halloween and people are eating a lot of sugar and toxic stuff. Then we're moving into Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're opening the door to all of this, first with lots of candy, and then we're moving into a challenging situation for many of us, which is getting together with our families. And almost all of us have some form of family trauma that we are either going to do our best to avoid by keeping our mouths shut, or we may get into actual conflicts. And then there is a tendency to drink quite a bit of alcohol during this time, which adds more to the toxic level of things. So it's a very interesting time. And there's some profound work that's been done through German New Medicine and also through Recall Healing, whose foundation is German New Medicine. And they've looked at thousands of cases of flu and respiratory issues. And they find in their studies that, first of all, these things like a sore throat and a respiratory infection is actually the recovery phase of a problem that has to do with not being comfortable or feeling safe in an environment, and having to do with our words, and then when it comes to the lungs, breathing the same air as somebody. Now, I know that might sound strange, but it's what we would call a territorial issue. And when we're really upset about people and or are suppressing the way that we feel about them, we can have a major issue with being in the same airspace. And to protect ourselves, we want to open up our lungs and make them bigger and stronger. And the way that we do that is by eating away at the lung tissue with microorganisms that our body produces from the inside. So I don't want to get too complicated with you about this right now, but I do want to remind you about how we talked about pleomorphism before. Pleomorphism is the way that our wisdom of our body takes a normal cell and changes its function so that it can provide us something that we need. In this case, eating away at the tissue in our lungs or at the tissue in our throat so that we have a bigger airway to take in what we need. And then the healing process is when we have completed the challenge that we're in. So we're no longer in a Thanksgiving dinner. We're no longer in a Christmas dinner. And we're home in our safe environment, and we've made it through another year of dealing with family issues. And at the end of it, then everything starts to heal back in, and in order to do that, it takes energy. There we get the fever, and then it moves out the tissue, the harmed tissue, with mucus and such. So we're dealing with what the whole process that we know as sore throats and lung issues and congestion and all of that stuff. And it's actually a healing process, but we call it a flu. And instead of supporting the body in this process, what we do instead is we fight it. We fight our own body's wisdom. Our bodies are really wise. And if they're producing a fever, what we want to do is help that fever. We don't want to suppress the fever. What science has actually shown us in places where they're willing to actually tell us the truth, instead of just look at how to sell more pharmaceuticals, is that when we actually allow ourselves to move through a fever and support the fever by taking hot baths and putting ourselves in warm blankets and laying down and going to sleep and letting ourselves have our fever and have our chills, we can move through these things in 24 to 48 hours. But when we start using things like aspirins and Advil and ibuprofen and all these things that bring a fever down, that reduces our body's ability to break down the toxic cells. It makes it harder and harder. We're telling our immune system that we don't want it to work. So we're actually asking our immune system, by giving it these medications, to get less effective. And what we found is the people who've never gotten things like aspirin to bring down their fever, they happen to get through these things so much quicker. And the body has a natural response to produce an enormous amount of mucus and cough it up and get it out. It has a tendency to create diarrhea, to push toxins out. It has a tendency to vomit, to push those toxins out. And it'll do that in 24 to 48 hours, and then we're done. And I know it's not fun, but it will give us a stronger immune system, and we know that because after the illness we actually feel healthier, not weaker. And what are we dealing with more and more in this day and age right now, but having the idea of long-tail COVID, of viruses that continue the aftermath of a virus that'll go on for months. So people have a flu, and then they no longer have the flu, but they feel miserable for months afterwards. They're still coughing, they're still tired, they still have brain fog, and all these things. And why is that? It's because we've added more poisons to the picture. We haven't actually gone ahead and helped the body move these things out. We actually end up with the toxins being stored in our fat cells, being stored in our bone marrow, being stored in tissues, which weaken us and produce an enormous kind of a load on our immune system. So I'm asking you to start to think in a new way, not about going to war with our bodies, but how can we support our bodies in being stronger and healthier? One thing that's very inexpensive and has helped so many people is a homeopathic of ferrum phosphoricum. It's iron, a type of iron, and iron in our blood helps to create, and it helps to support oxygenation of our blood, and the blood moves throughout the entire body. So what we want to do is consider taking a very inexpensive little cell salt. Cell salts are kind of a combination between physical and homeopathic. They're what we call a 6X. You can buy them in any health food store. I, of course, have very special quality ones that are made with a type of sugar that isn't lactose. So for people that have problems with lactose intolerance, it's kind of a moot point because the homeopathics are so tiny. Very rarely does anybody ever have a problem with lactose from a homeopathic remedy. But if you wanted to take things to a next level, I have an incredibly well-made ferrum phosphoricum, about the same price as anywhere else. And what I wanted to tell you is that every homeopathic remedy has an enormous amount of information behind it because it's been researched for almost 250 to 300 years, the majority of them. And that one of the mental things about ferrum phosphoricum is fear of going into a crowd. They tend to be talkative people, but they feel shut down and they can't share. And that's oftentimes what happens to us. We feel comfortable in the world. We feel comfortable being out with friends and doing things in the world, but when it comes to being around family, all of our childhood insecurities and fears of not getting the approval that we need at a time when it's absolutely imperative to our survival that our parents like us. So we go against ourselves, we go against our desires, we go against our inner truths when we're little. If we feel angry, we don't necessarily express it. If we feel sad and our parents, feel like it's not a good thing, especially for boys, they'll, make fun of boys who cry and things like that. I mean, we tend to feel like it's not safe to express ourselves. And what did we say that the flu is about? But feeling like we're not safe in our own territory, definitely not safe to communicate our true feelings. And then we have sore throats that begin, and then there's an issue with the lung that has to do with lack of confidence, lack of anything, lack of money, lack of whatever, and there's such a huge comparative piece that also happens in families. So if you happen to not be the highest earner, the one who fits the family MO the most, you may be the one who finds themselves with the flu after you've gone home and gotten back into your normal environment. Your body, during the time that you're with the family, is eating away at this tissue, and then when you get back home and you've resolved it and you're back in your own safe world, then you get your flu. And so many people think that the only way that we get things like flus is by transmitting germs. But honestly, if it was really about transmitting germs, everyone would get a flu, because we're all around people that have a flu somewhere, somehow. We have to consider that there possibly is another form of transmission. And this I have personally looked at most of my professional life, but it's not the common MO. We only think germ theory. So I'd like to remind you, I have a whole YouTube about germ theory versus terrain. And in this instance, I'm talking even a little bit more about how emotions affect the terrain, and go into that whole pleomorphic effect that we just talked about. So I hope you're beginning to get the idea. And when we come from this place, we're going to be coming from a different way of understanding and preparing ourselves to meet this season without being sick, and actually meet this particular season with a high quality of functioning. That's what it's really about, isn't it? You know, not to just not be sick, but how can we really thrive in this time to be able to enjoy this really amazing time of harvest, to enjoy this time of beginning to go deeper inside, and to recognize our subtleties that begins in the fall and actually fulfills itself in the winter. And for many of us, what happens in the winter is we're spending it sick, rather than in an opportunity to do some really deep soul searching and looking into our deeper shadow places. And if we go there, we can really create some profound levels of healing by bringing the light of awareness into those darker places, and get some support, possibly through homeopathic remedies, or meditation, or breathing practices. There's so many ways to explore these areas and create deeper bonds and relationships with the people that we care about. Now, we also have the whole realm of what do we do to support our bodies in this particular time. And nature guides us in this way of looking at what we can physically do with our bodies. So there are things that we've had available to us that begin to fade away as we move into the winter and the later parts of fall. We have less and less fruits and vegetables, and more of our meats come into our reality. And most of us find ourselves really appreciating warmth and hot soups and hot stews, and eating foods that are profoundly nourishing, and getting the support of vegetables that have been fermented so that they're designed to make it through into the winter. That's what our ancestors ate. And if we can honor the diets of our ancestors, oftentimes it will make the biggest difference for us, because our DNA is designed to eat the way that our ancestors did. So if you happen to have a skin color that's more like mine, you're probably of Northern European descent, and that would mean that there were not bananas and mangoes and kiwis and grapes and these sorts of things available to us in the fall and in the winter. There are, like where we live here in Austin, persimmon that are just starting to come on, pomegranates that are coming on. There are some interesting foods for us because wintertime here is the beginning, well I should say fall, is typically a great time for greens, where we can have collards and kale and chard and these kinds of veggies. And when we cook them, particularly in a broth, they become extraordinarily nourishing for us. Also, mushrooms are still available, and these can be very supportive as far as our immune system goes as we move into the winter time, but definitely during the fall, in preparing our immune systems to deal with the winter. And these are things that nature really provides for us during this time of year. So as the leaves are falling and we're letting go of the old and letting things go deeper into the earth and get rooted, and there are actually great benefits in root vegetables for us during the winter that have been cooked and fermented. These roasted beets, roasted carrots. We can harvest our yams and potatoes. We can have these wonderful, nourishing, warm, hot soups. This is a time to go that direction. It's also a time to not be drinking cold drinks. Actually, truly, there is no time that's a good time to drink cold drinks because they make it really hard on our digestion. Our bodies are 98.6, our stomachs are particularly warm, and if we want to support digestion, we want to be drinking warm or room temperature things, not ice cold things ever. But I know people love them, they drink them anyway, and if they're going to have them at any time, when it's really hot outside, we can oftentimes get away with it. But in the winter time, it's not a great idea. In Oriental medicine, they even recognize the need to keep the body warm. They talk about the warmth body. And Rudolf Steiner spoke profoundly about the etheric body, which is the warmth body. And so by keeping ourselves warm, and some very special parts of the body, one is called the wind gate in the back of the neck. So actually wearing a scarf as the temperatures get colder and keeping our chests warm is a really wonderful thing to do. And one of the things that is one of the most profound things that we can do, and has been recognized for centuries, is something called a castor oil pack. Castor oil is an amazing substance that stimulates our lymphatic system to work for us. And any place that you put it externally on the body, it will affect the organs that are underneath it. And so you'll see on my website, many different places where I mention a castor oil pack. But it's an inexpensive way for us to support our immune system in doing its job. And it just involves either taking some castor oil, rubbing it into our bodies, and going into a sauna with it. If you don't have a sauna, the other way to deal with it is to drizzle castor oil onto flannel, either cotton or wool, and place that over the part of the body that you want to support, and then add heat to it, either with a hot water bottle, a heating pad of some sort. There are many different things that people are using these days that you could put into the oven and then lay on top of your body to keep you warm. Even just putting your towels in the dryer and then laying them on top of you. This will stimulate warmth, and then putting a blanket on top of that, and experiencing 45 minutes of the wonderful heating support into your body through the castor oil. It's a wonderful thing to do. Another thing that I love working with is ozonated oils. Ozonated oils will take ozone, O3, which produces oxygen, and support oxygenation of the cells, which is essential for moving toxins out of the body. And anywhere that you put it on the outside, again, it will be affected on the inside. One thing that most people don't understand is that if we place ozonated oils on places where we had old infections, oftentimes those old infections, like in particular sinus infections for this season, or throat infections or lymphatic infections, if we place ozonated oil on our lymph nodes, it's profound in its effect to help protect us from getting ill. And we can do that very easily. I carry a wonderful line of ozonated oils where they take 6 days in the ozonating process to deeply bombard the oil with a high level of O3. And so it's extremely powerful. And we can use that anywhere that we know that we have a weak spot. We can place it on our lungs. If we know we're having problems with our colon, we can place it on our colon. If we know we have an ache or pain, like many people have a pain just under the left scapula or right scapula, in the liver areas in the scapula. I mean, there's just so many ways that we can use ozonated oil, and also directly on a cut or a place that you have experienced some pain. So that's an excellent thing to do also, is to have around in your medicine cabinet. No, I'm sorry, not in your medicine cabinet. Ozonated oil needs to be kept in your refrigerator. But your ferrum phosphoricum is a great thing to have in the medicine cabinet. The castor oil is a great thing to have in your medicine cabinet for emergencies. Many people these days are loading up on vitamin C and zinc, and these are excellent, but there are things that are stronger, and one of them is andrographis, and another one, believe it or not, is melatonin. And much higher levels of melatonin than we had thought we should be taking from the past. And you can go back and look at my YouTubes about using really high levels of melatonin. But you can slowly increase your levels of melatonin if you like. And as you'll see, the sky is the limit when it comes to the use of melatonin. Many people, when they take small doses of melatonin, will find that they feel groggy afterwards. But that's only because the melatonin is helping to detox the toxic substances in the brain, and that can make you feel tired in the morning. Once we get through a certain period of time, and if we slowly build up, even if we're feeling kind of groggy in the morning, we find that we actually are strengthening ourselves, and melatonin happens to be one of the most powerful things for feeding our mitochondria. If you listen to my YouTubes regularly, you'll know that I talk about mitochondria an enormous amount, because mitochondria are these amazing bacteria that are in our cells that actually produce all of our energy. It doesn't matter if you're a leaf, an insect, an animal, or a human, our energy comes from mitochondria. And without it, we have no energy, we have no life. It's essential for life, and the more energy we have, the more we're able to fight off any kind of, or support our body's functioning. So there I went into that old language of fighting off something, because it's so everywhere in our world. It's so everywhere in our training as any kind of practitioner, that we're going to war with these things. But no, what we want the energy for is our bodies to have the strength to do what it needs to do to move the toxic materials and poisons out of our body. And that the mitochondria can do for us. So anything that requires energy, which is everything in our bodies, the mitochondria is involved with. The organs that require the most energy, the most oxygen, are the brain and the heart and the liver, and they have the most mitochondria per cell. There are parts of the brain that actually have 100,000 mitochondria per cell. And our typical muscles have like 50 mitochondria per cell. And as we get older, there's less and less, and therefore you'll see older people slowing down and slowing down. But if we can find a way to increase our mitochondria and provide an environment that makes them happy to be with us, well, we can maintain a much higher level of activity and joy and energy and brain function and sexuality and all the things that bring us joy in our lives. So we want to support our mitochondria in any way that we can. And to that effect, I have something that I have found has been profound for our patients and myself in particular. I've used lots of this, and it's something called BCATP, BioCarbon-ATP, but I like to call it brain candy ATP because it has a profound effect directly on the brain and the gut for mitochondrial support. And when you support the mitochondria, we also, first of all, have a dumping of the toxicity that's harming the mitochondria. So it's important for us to remember this. And for many of us, if we're already really slow and sluggish and uncomfortable and having brain fog issues, we have to start very slow with something like BCATP. Now is the time to do it so that you're ready for the depth of fall and winter, so that you can little by little build up to have stronger and stronger ATP for when winter gets here. That is a type of a way of dealing with a challenge. How do we make ourselves stronger to meet that challenge? How do we make ourselves more capable to meet the challenge? BCATP is one of those things that can help us. So can working with heat. So I highly recommend for anyone who can afford it that you consider, if you don't already have one, getting a sauna, an infrared sauna that will increase the benefits of your sauna to help your body to increase your mitochondrial content, because infrared light is profound at supporting our mitochondria. And I also love to add to the sauna, once it's heated up, a little ozonator to ozonate our tissue, which adds the oxygen to go to town in supporting the movement of our blood, oxygenated through the body to pick up toxins and move it out of the body. And then we can support it even more by using a coffee enema, whose job, by the way, is to support the cleansing of your liver. Most people think that enemas are about making a bowel movement happen for somebody who's constipated. That oftentimes is the case, but that's not what a coffee enema is directly about. A coffee enema has a chemical in it called palmate, and that palmate supports the gallbladder in releasing bile and therefore cleansing the liver. Which brings us to another thing that most of us don't realize, and that is the bile ducts, which are so important for the health of our liver and our abilities to fight off or to support our bodies in moving out poisons and toxins that keep us in a situation where our body needs to create a flu. So if we are able to support our bodies in moving these toxins out, then we don't have to invite a process that has fevers and all the discomfort of what we call a flu. So the other piece that most of us don't realize is that our bile ducts are a home for enormous amounts of parasites, particularly flukes, and they can weaken our liver's ability to break down toxins. And so by working with cleansing the bile ducts and moving bile stones, which are gallstones, and liver stones. There are stones that are made from toxic bile that are in our liver as well as in our gallbladder. And if we can move those out of the body, we can really support you in moving to a whole new level of health. This is the time right now for doing some of our higher level, more intense types of detoxes, like a liver gallbladder flush, like a colon cleanse, like working with starting to make sure that our bodies are releasing our toxins effectively, which means looking at the foundations of our body's ability to get rid of toxins through what we call drainage. And the very foundation of drainage is bowel movements. We need to have good bowel movements, or we're just going to keep circulating toxins through the body. The body needs to get rid of our toxins. The safest, gentlest way to get rid of it is through a few methods. One is the bowel, and that's our biggest method of getting rid of toxins. Another is through our skin, which covers our entire body, and that's through good sweating. And that's where the saunas come in handy. And for those of you who love to work out, boy, that's great to work out to the point of sweating. That will help to move toxins effectively out of your body. And then, of course, working with these wonderful dietary things and detoxes that can take us to a whole new level, like where we have a large movement of toxins out of the body at one time. But first of all, we need to be strong enough to handle that. And that's why we have to start with the bowel, gently supporting the liver. And one of my favorite ways to do that is with a product called Advanced Tudca, which supports the movement of the toxins out of the gallbladder before we get to the point of actually doing a liver gallbladder flush. And also working with our kidneys by drinking enough fluids and supporting the body that way. There are substances that we know make a huge difference, and one of them is colostrum. Colostrum is something that if we were nursed, we received. It's one of the greatest gifts that a mother could ever give to her baby. And denying it to a baby, to me, is really a very huge mistake. If you want this child to grow strong and healthy with ease, because our colostrum is the very first substance that a woman makes in her breasts and the baby can nurse, and it involves an enormous amount of immune support through the colostrum itself. While there are some reputable companies, not all of them that produce colostrum are reputable, but there's a very, very powerful colostrum that we share with a cow, possibly other animals if you have access to them, where the calf gets the very first drink, but there's plenty from a cow of colostrum to be able to give the first milking of the colostrum to companies that make powdered colostrum from grass-fed cows. And that colostrum is profound for helping to prevent serious health issues in our fall, winter, or honestly any time of the year. And recently I was speaking to some people who have had very severe issues with ulcerative colitis. And they talked to me about how they used a very special yogurt. So that yogurt is a 36 or 24-hour yogurt. I've talked a lot about Natasha Campbell McBride's GAP diet that we've used to help heal serious bowel issues and emotional issues. And part of that diet includes bone and meat broths, but another part of it is a 24-hour yogurt, which is a much more sour yogurt than the type of yogurt that you can buy in a health food store or grocery store. And when you make your own 24-hour yogurt or 36-hour yogurt, you have a very strong yogurt. And if you add colostrum to it, it produces a substance with which a number of these people with ulcerative colitis has said has been the only thing they've ever used that has immediately stopped a bleed when they've had it from ulcerative colitis. Now, that to me is a very profound statement, because if you don't have ulcerative colitis and you mix your homemade yogurt that you've fermented for at least 24 to 36 hours with colostrum, oh my goodness, what a powerful tool you have for supporting directly your bowel, but indirectly your lungs, because they are so hooked together. And I've talked about this a lot in my GAPS talks in the past, so you can look for those. I don't have time to get into all the similarities between the physicality of the lung cells and the bowel cells, but they look alike, they operate very similarly. It's fascinating how similar they are and how effective, how they affect each other so profoundly, and how effective it is to work with the bowel to support the lung and to work with breathing practices to support the bowel. It's really amazing. And nutrients and herbs and things that are great for the lungs. So I was hoping to not overwhelm you with this talk, and I know that once again here we are with one of these gigantic talks, and I keep hearing these stories about how millennials really only have an attention span of 10 minutes max, and 5 minutes is what you should be doing. But please know, if you are the type of person who is really challenged during this season, that you can get in touch with me, and we can do an individualized program for you, because we're all unique and different. I don't know that I've mentioned this for a long time, but my beginnings were in metabolic typing, and I still use this kind of information profoundly as a foundation when I work directly with my clients. But there are over 5,000 body types, and what's good for you is not necessarily great for other people. What we want to look at is what you personally need, and the only way to do that is for us to have a discussion or to work with somebody that you really trust who can treat you as an individual, not as anybody, or not as a person who is a flu person, or a COVID person, or a pneumonia person, or whatever. Oftentimes we literally we'll find that doctors will say, my pneumonia patient, instead of who you are. Because there is so many foundational things we need to look at when somebody has pneumonia. Oftentimes there's an emotional causation. Oftentimes there's a causation because of the environment that you're living in, and we need to look into that. Like, are you breathing unhealthy air? How often do you actually change the filter in your furnace and air conditioning system? This is the time to change your filters. Some really basic things like that. You know, this is a great time to make sure that you have clean ducts so that you can get the cleanest air. And if you have any awareness of any places where you have water damage, oh my goodness, this is time to make sure that you take care of that water damage, because any issues around mold could truly make this time of year more challenging for you and make it even much more difficult to clear a problem. So we need to look at the environment. We need to look at what you're consuming. We need to look at your emotional state. We need to consider your family relationships. And we need to consider just how much partying you're doing right now. And if you're willing to let go of that, or if that's a big, important part for you. And so what do we need to do to help you balance that out and support your body in moving any of the toxins that you might be consuming? So I hope that gives you a good idea. The whole bottom line is your body knows how to heal you. It does everything it knows how. Instead of going to war with it, let's find our best method and methods to support it in the process of healing and strengthening and rejuvenating us. Thank you for joining me once again, and I look forward to getting to know you and sharing more as time goes on.